Hi, my name is Glenn Story. I'm the founder and CEO of Patriot Mobile. I'd love for you to learn more about Patriot Mobile, www.patriotmobile.com/Gene V. More importantly, I'd like you to be a subscriber to his show. I mean, his Truthcast is amazing. And if you get to listen to some of them, you'll never go back. I really encourage you to come watch it.
With breaking news and political commentary from a public servant, serial entrepreneur, community leader, philanthropist, and American patriot, and a darn nice guy, it's time for the Grassroots Truthcast and your host, Gene Valentino.
Hi, friends. Gene Valentino. Welcome to another episode of Gene Valentino's Grassroots Truthcast. We have watched in the past few years, and certainly since Donald Trump's re-election, a transformation, almost a psychosis of transformation that seems to have occurred not only in the social environs, but in the political environment as well. And we have watched some things transform literally overnight on so many levels that it's like drinking water out of a fire hose. We're here with two guests of mine, Bill Mower, who's a political operative, who's a technology geek buddy of mine, and was a former candidate for United States Congress, as I was here in Florida. And our special guest this week, which Bill and I will both entertain, is Roman Buhler. You ever heard of Keep Nine? Well, Keep Nine is an initiative to limit the Supreme Court seats to 9. And how we do it, the way we do it, walked into a very interesting conversation of who's going to be helping Keep Nine and his coalition group called the Madison Coalition, which is shepherding this initiative nationwide. This is a story that's transformative. Right after this.
Throughout history, the spirit of patriotism has prevailed. The battles may have changed, but the values remain the same. Today, in 2024, we find ourselves at a pivotal moment where the call for unity, freedom, and a better future echoes louder than ever. For more than 10 years, Patriot Mobile has been committed to supporting the values that make our nation great. With affordable plans and reliable nationwide coverage, Patriot Mobile is not just a wireless service. It's a call to action for those who believe in the American dream. Because this year is not just any year, it's the most important year since our nation's founding. Choose a wireless carrier that shares your values. Choose Patriot Mobile.
Welcome back to the Grassroots Truthcast, folks, for another great episode. My guests today, as mentioned earlier, Bill Mower and Roman Buhler. I'm going to let each of them expound a little further on their backgrounds because it's so diverse. Roman, first you. Thank you for joining us, sir. I'm glad to have you here today to talk about hopefully what becomes a constitutional amendment freezing the number of seats on the Supreme Court. Yes or no?
Yes.
So you be okay with that?
I'd be just that's the project. That's how we save the country.
And you came to me and to my audience through my dear friend Bill Mower. Bill, say hello. And how did this all happen between you and Roman?
Well, thanks, Gene. I met Roman at a Leadership Institute breakfast, and we kept running into each other as I was on the campaign trail and going to different political events, particularly in the state of Virginia. I couldn't avoid Roman, and as I heard about Keep Nine, I became a supporter, and I want to help take Keep Nine to the next logical step and get the amendment rolling with all of the people that I know from Congress, the people in Virginia, and the other Republicans and Democrats who are committed to this nationwide.
You know, I was watching Senator Chuck Schumer, just a year or two ago, take on a threat against Chief Justice Gorsuch, I believe it was, that the wrath of God or something, some metaphor he used was going to come cascading down upon him if Gorsuch did something one way or the other. Was to me an imposition of the autonomy of the Supreme Court. And one of the ways that Schumer was trying to effectuate this change, Roman, was to impact the Supreme Court by making Justice Gorsuch's opinion less valuable or diluted in any event by packing the court, a whole concept of packing the court and putting more justices on the court. Now, between us guys, nine's enough. I'm having trouble figuring out why we need 13 or any other higher number. To me, I think the justices can synthesize more effectively amongst themselves at that level, and to get any larger, it'd be somewhat diluted. But more fundamentally, where are you coming from on the Supreme Court case? Excuse the number of justices on the Supreme Court.
So a little bit about my background. I started in grassroots politics in California many years ago. My big break was that Newt Gingrich hired me in 1989 to come back and be his first House committee counsel. I spent 14 years as the chief Republican lawyer dealing with election law issues in the House of Representatives. I saw firsthand how the left plans to take over the elections process and rig it in their favor. But I never thought I'd see the day when the left wanted to undermine the independence of the Supreme Court. You look all over the world, and the one thing that tyrants want to do is get control of their Supreme Court so that they can wield unlimited power. And that's what the left wants to do in this country. So the story of Keep Nine is that in a few years ago, we could see the left beginning to talk about packing the court. And I went to someone that you may know, former Reagan Attorney General Ed Meese. And I said, Ed, they're going to pack the court. What do we do? And he said, you're right. We need an amendment to prevent them from doing it. We need a constitutional amendment which takes away the power of politicians to manipulate the size of the court. And he said, but it will never work unless we find a Democrat to start it, to lead it. So it took us a year, and we found a Democrat, a former Attorney General of Virginia, the late Andy Miller, who'd actually run for the United States Senate as a Democrat, lost by 1% of the vote to John Warner, if you remember that name from years ago. But he was a Democrat in good standing. He agreed to lead the movement, and we launched with a bipartisan coalition, 15 former state attorneys general, half Republican, half Democrat. And that's how this movement got started. And the amendment simply says the Supreme Court of the United States shall be composed of 9 justices. What it means is that politicians will no longer be able to manipulate the size of the court to bring it under their control. And democracy depends on an independent court, just like the Super Bowl depends on an independent referee. You couldn't have a Super Bowl if the home team controlled the referees. And so that's what we're fighting for, is the ultimate institution that protects limited constitutional government in America.
And what would you think would be the main reason why certain members of Congress would like to fight you just as hard to prevent this from not being frozen, to allow it to expand? Where's the thinking coming from to do otherwise?
So I think it's helpful to look behind the left-wing members of Congress and look at the interest groups that control them. So to start off, you have the pro-abortion crowd. They want a packed court so they can reverse Dobbs. Now, but behind them are an even more dangerous opponent, and that is the teachers' unions and the public employee unions. And they want a packed court for one very simple reason. They want to reverse a decision that prohibits them from collecting dues from non-members. So if they pack the court, they reverse that decision. They get hundreds of millions of dollars a year in new money. And so they're a driving force. Then you take the folks who want to destroy Second Amendment rights, who want to confiscate firearms. They can't do that without reversing the Supreme Court decision that says that firearms ownership, Second Amendment, guarantees individuals the rights to own firearms. Look at the so-called civil rights crowd, which is really I call them the quota crowd. that want to restore racial quotas for college admissions and discriminate against racial groups they don't like. They need a new Supreme Court. Look at the groups, the folks on Wall Street that have invested billions in these Green New Deal schemes. They need a packed Supreme Court to empower the regulators that will force the public to buy the cars and the dishwashers and all the other stuff that doesn't work, but will enrich their Green New Deal pals in Wall Street. And then the most dangerous group of all are the election lawyers, the Democratic election lawyers that want to get rid of the protections against voter fraud, that want to nationalize control of elections, that want to get rid of the Electoral College so that they can basically cheat their way to long-term dominance in American politics. They can't do that unless they reverse the Supreme Court decision that allows voter ID requirements. And they can't do that unless they can nationalize elections, which the Supreme Court would rule is unconstitutional. So when Schumer looks at the people who fund him, the teachers' unions and the pro-abortion groups and all the other woke cultural groups and the bureaucrats and the Wall Street Green New Deal folks, he's basically their puppet. And they can't get done what they want to get done without packing the court. And if I want your listeners to remember one thing, is that we're on the Titanic. We're headed straight for the iceberg. The next time the left gets a majority, they are going to get rid of the Senate filibuster. They're going to add a new state or two, and they're going to pack the court. And when they pack the court, everything that limited government conservatives have worked for the last 50 years is going down the tubes. And it's going to happen unless we find a way to stop them. And we can't stop them by winning elections. Sooner or later, they're going to win election. That's why this amendment is so critical for America's future.
One of the things I think you offered there that I thought was most interesting is that you needed a Democrat involved with this to get it to take it over the line, if you will, to get the majority needed in the House or Senate for a constitutional amendment. This process, slightly different than what everyone's used to, coming with a Democrat at the helm is comparable to what I'm hearing you say you've got going with these interns coming in to see you. Explain the intern program through the Madison Coalition, and then Bill, feel free to jump in on some of this.
So one of the most exciting things that we've discovered in this effort is that it really, really, really appeals to the younger generation. Younger voters, they may be more liberal in some issues, but as we saw in this last election, a lot of them went for Trump, but they don't have the same party loyalty that the previous generations of young people had. And one of their big things is they don't trust politicians. So and the other thing is that they are looking for opportunities for people to work together. A lot of them would like to see people work together on bigger issues. And so when they hear that there is an effort to preserve the independence of the Supreme Court, which preserves basically the integrity of the political system, they're interested. And we have, I think the latest number, I think we have 17 interns who have signed up to work for us for 2 months this summer. And many, many of them would define themselves as center or center left. And I think we have some others who are hardcore conservatives. I'm going to be interviewing a law student from Liberty University tomorrow. He's very excited about it. But the idea of getting these people to work together on an effort that will strengthen checks and balances against the abuse of power, I think shows that if we do this right, we could build a movement of young people that could essentially force even Democrats who don't want to support this amendment to support it, because if they don't, they could lose their opportunity to win young voters in the next election. And we'll test that this summer as we reach out and talk to the hundreds and even thousands of young people who are in Washington this summer. And if it works, we may be able to create a movement that could significantly impact the 2026 elections.
Billy, you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, the thing I want to add is that when you look at these individual Supreme Court decisions, like the Janus decision, I was at a dinner where Bill Messenger, the gentleman who argued and won that case in the Supreme Court, was sitting. I was sitting at a table with him, and he explained to me that in your state, Gene, in Florida, the teachers unions revenues have gone down by over 50% because they're no longer obligated to join the teachers union. And that means that this huge and powerful force that is not focused on making kids smarter and better, but is focused on making sure they preserve the teachers' summer vacations and high-end teachers' pay, and are doing things like protecting teachers convicted of drug dealing in New York City and keeping them on the payroll and out of the classroom. These decisions, when you explain them to young people, even Democrats say, "I had no idea that this is how this works." You know, the Janus decision is something that will limit the power of public sector unions, and public sector unions shouldn't exist in this country because it's not like private sector unions where there's a big bad wolf in the form of a giant corporation that's going after and trying to push down their wages. You know, public sector employees are paid by wages that you and I and every other taxpayer provides to them. And so some of these decisions, you know, like Ramon mentioned, the people who are crazy about going after and grabbing guns. One of the guys that endorsed me and that I've become friends with is Dick Heller, and Dick is the Washington D.C. versus Heller case, and that guaranteed that an individual has a right to own a firearm, not a militia, and it allowed handguns to be legal in Washington D.C. And you know, Gene, the group of the concentrated group of new handgun registrants, do you know who that is in Washington D.C.?
Not Gen Z.
No, it's young African American women.
Oh my.
And they need guns because they're the ones who are being victimized on the streets of Washington D.C. in neighborhoods that are horribly unsafe. And so listening to Dick talk about these people who found him and thanked him because their daughter, their sister, you know, other people were able to stop an assault or a rape because they were carrying a handgun. It's just downright astounding.
Folks, you're watching Grassroots Truthcast. I'm Gene Valentino, and this is one of our weekly episodes we put out. Please subscribe at www.genevalentino.com. You subscribe, and we push out these wonderful episodes to you by email so you don't have to fish around for them. You've just heard some great commentary from Bill Mower, who is a former candidate for United States Congress in Virginia, and he is the one that introduced me to our other guest here today, who we're co-hosting, if you will, is Mr. Buhler, Roman Buhler. Roman or Roman?
Roman.
Excuse me. Roman Buhler. And Roman has been, you know, Roman, what you were talking about with these advocates coming in, younger generation of folks who insist on this cap of 9 Supreme Court justices, is in the same week I'm hearing about how much of the Gen Z crowd stayed Republican and insisted on a conservative bent. It's as if something hit them on the head or woke them up. I don't know what's going on, but the door is swinging back the other way now. And what I'm seeing is these issues that these young folks are trying to get behind is consistent with what Bill has just talked about the protection of certain basic constitutional rights that that were at risk or could have been at risk in the last 4 years. Your comment on the backdrop of what's around you on your Keep Nine initiative.
So the background is that for the last 50 years, I mean, I came of age, political age, in 1964. One of the first books I read about politics was Conscience of a Conservative by Barry Goldwater, and Why Not Victory. And the premise then and the premise now is that when government grows too big, the cost is both freedom and prosperity. And if we don't find a way to restore checks and balances on the growth and abuse of federal power, the growth and abuse of federal power is going to continue. And I believe that in an era, in our era, when the Democrats are now committed to getting rid of the filibuster the next time they win power, the only way to permanently limit the abuse of power is constitutional. Now, we've had 27 constitutional amendments in America. Some of them happened in special circumstances. Some of them were negotiated. But in the last century, we've had 5 amendments that significantly impacted American life that came up from the grassroots: women's right to vote, prohibition, repeal of prohibition, presidential term limits, and the 18-year-old vote. Every one of those started as way too controversial to pass. All of them were simple enough that a 6th grade voter could understand them. When they became widely known and popular, public pressure forced their adoption. And I think we need a new era. You know, I'm a child of essentially of the Reagan Revolution and the Gingrich Revolution. I was actually there for the Gingrich Revolution. We need another American revolution. And Trump said it actually in his 2017 inaugural address, which is it's time to transfer power out of Washington and back to the states and the people. And if that's the revolution I'm training young people to lead and looking for current politicians to lead. And I think there's 3 specific powers right now that we could take away from politicians and bureaucrats in Washington. We would have the overwhelming support of the American people. The first one is, of course, the amendment we're talking about, the Keep Nine Amendment. Very simple, already backed by 200 members of Congress, the Republican National Committee, 800 state legislators, a wide variety of conservative and grassroots groups. That's amendment number 1. Amendment number 2 would uproot the administrative state, would do what Donald Trump and Steve Bannon and others are talking about, deconstructing the state, not by repealing regulations. That's cutting the grass. It's by taking away the authority of regulators. That's ripping up the weeds by its roots. And this amendment, which we worked out with Ed Meese's help, simply says that if a quarter of the House or the Senate object to any new proposed federal regulation, regardless of its cost, both houses of Congress have to approve it. Why a quarter? Because a quarter is always a majority of the minority party. And the minority party ought to have the right to demand a vote on stuff. So if it requires a vote of Congress to approve these regulations, bureaucrats will no longer be able to impose regulations by administrative decree. They will no longer be able to threaten people that they don't like with regulations. And we can restore the vision of the founders, which is the laws are made by elected officials. That's amendment number 2. And polling shows it's 2-to-1 popular with voters. The third one, there's no text for it yet, but we can no longer have the luxury of trusting members of Congress with the authority to borrow money without limits, right? If you have a teenager that's going out and putting money on your credit card and there's no limits, your family's going to go bankrupt. And Congress would make the worst teenager in America look fiscally responsible, right? They are bankrupting the country. It's a bipartisan thing, and we shouldn't trust them anymore. And we need some kind of an amendment. But we won't get that amendment unless people, like listeners of this program, figure out that it's possible to enact them. So our view is we start with the Keep Nine Amendment, which is the easiest one. Overwhelming support, absolutely critical. If that works, we begin to build support for the amendment to curb the authority of regulators. And as that one gains steam, I think more and more people will say, boy, we got to come up. It's possible to do amendments. Let's see if we can build the broad bipartisan coalition for an amendment that would curb borrowing and save the country from bankruptcy. And just to take a step back, if you were China, you'd say, how do we destroy America? Well, we destroy America the same way America destroyed the Soviet Union. First, you bankrupt them, then you split them up, right? So the Chinese are just hoping we bankrupt ourselves, and then if they can get rid of the Supreme Court, when there's a fight, American unity disappears because there's no referee. You know, what would happen to the Super Bowl if the referee were controlled by one side or the other? So these reforms are not just about making America a better place. It's about saving the world from the threat of totalitarianism if we do it right.
This is unbelievable you're speaking in these terms, and we've just met today, but the fact is that these 11 amendments, I call them Gino's second Bill of Rights. Please make an effort to read them. It's on the toolbar on my homepage. It's where have you been, man? I wish I had this conversation with you. This is absolutely water in the desert to me, because I think the saving of America is incumbent upon this, what I think will be the once in a lifetime opportunity of getting constitutional amendments passed, absent the Convention of States process. If we do it as the Constitution suggests, first and foremost through the Congress, you're going to need a supermajority in effect in the Senate and so forth to get this to happen. And the problem I have is that it's been impossible to get the sides to come together and coalesce, regardless of Democrat versus Republican, because a vitriol has developed. Well, why did the vitriol develop? There was a blind hate for one side over the other. The merits of the legislation had less to do with whether you were Democrat or Republican in the way and how you were going to support it. The 27 amendments to the Constitution that you alluded to all speak in terms of rights, privileges, entitlements, things that the Constitution itself, the corpus, was silent on. And therefore, we had a mechanism, a remedy in place to put amendments to that document in place. And we have over 250 years. It's called amendments. But like you're suggesting, Ramon, I think that this is a time, and we can seize the opportunity if we, with this Republican House, Senate, which hopefully grows in the midterms, and the president remaining Republican. With those three items, we've got the magic sauce to be able to push through in the same lightning speed we've seen things in these last 4 months. We might be able to push through a United States constitutional amendment or two more. And the one that's missing in those 27 is behavior, a constitutional provision based on behavior. Said differently, when you get elected to office, whether it was Billy and I running for Congress, Senate, and so forth, if we use the weight and power of that office to adversely influence some other side, some other position, someone else's livelihood, their legal entitlement to be in office, the abuse, the threatened abuse of the court system, the third leg of the stool to encumber you from running in the first place, and so forth, is a crime. It's a felony. And the elected official perpetrating that fraud gets criminally prosecuted and put in jail. Civil or criminal penalties, or both, are needed in a constitutional amendment that specifically addresses the bad behavior of the people we elected. Right now, we've got the act of treason, and treason also talks about lynching them. I don't think that's going to happen either. But we need a formidable constitutional amendment that puts pain and suffering upon the elected. Now, what do you need that for? We got the senator in New Jersey just went to jail. Name escaped.
Menendez,
yeah. What's his name? Menendez, of course. Senator Menendez went to jail, and his wife may be too. And as a result, it was the misuse of the authority and control vested in him, and he wasn't hurting another person or a political party. That was for self-gain. Or how about a Speaker of the House who seems to know, who has a 100% track record on how to vote, how to invest in the stock market, and comes into office with maybe a few bucks and leaves, what is she now, close to 40 years in office with a net worth of over $100 million. Now, would someone tell me how we can administer a constitutional amendment of bad behavior that imposes serious and direct, painful penalties on these people who they themselves think are insulated from the vote from the people who put them in there? Notwithstanding the fact we've got election fraud violation, we've got abuse of power with different people on staff, we've got payoff and favoritism going on with the drug industry. Why? Because of the drug lobbyists. And I could go on. A constitutional amendment entitled the Bad Behavior Amendment that results in punitive damages and fines to these people who did the nation wrong, who put themselves ahead of the nation, the very people that put them in. What say you?
You raise such an important point. And one of the things, if the young people that I bring to Washington remember one thing, is that they've mostly been taught that the members of Congress and the politicians we elect are our leaders, and that somehow our job is to pick them and then follow them. And my argument is they are not our leaders. They are our employees.
That's right.
They work for us. And when you look at how employees behave, politicians mostly behave the same way. They want to get reelected. They want to get more power. They will do whatever it takes. If you ask them which is more important, the future of the country in 20 years or getting elected today, you know what the answer is. The people in a company who care about the future of the company are not the employees, it's the owners. And my message to these kids and to everybody who's listening on this program is we are the owners of the American experiment. It's our experiment. They work for us. And so if we don't think of ways, it's like you can have the best bred dog from the kennel, and if you don't train him, you're going to have to buy a new rug pretty soon. And what we need to do is we need to train a generation of citizen activists that most of the work of self-government is holding elected officials accountable and making them do what we want. And my hope is that by getting this very simple amendment that polling shows would overwhelmingly be supported by the voters, if we can get this Keep 9 amendment done, other people will start thinking of other amendments that we need to hold politicians accountable. I once suggested that every member of Congress ought to have their own personal, free of charge IRS tax accountant to give them a full tax audit every single year, right? So that they would appreciate what ordinary citizens have to go through with this complex tax code, right? And I think the average American would say, what a great idea to have a personal auditor for every member of Congress. But those kinds of ideas won't come up if we rely on Congress for ideas. We've got to generate ideas from below. And I think the biggest challenge we face is that people don't believe that constitutional amendments are possible. And I believe that this particular amendment, the Keep 9 amendment, and other amendments are possible because if we make the public aware that they exist, the public will overwhelmingly support them. And then we ask politicians, well, where do you stand? And a politician who won't support the Keep 9 amendment, a politician who in effect says, I want politicians to keep the power to pack the court, when those politicians start losing, just like the Republican politicians who started talking about cutting Social Security, they lost, right? So the modern Republican Party does not talk about cutting Social Security. It's off the. If we can take court packing off the Democrats' agenda because they lose every time they talk about it, and they lose when they won't support the amendment, that sends a message to every activist in the country, amendments are possible. And we start thinking about amendments not to enhance the power of politicians and bureaucrats, but amendments like yours to limit their power and restore self-government to the country. And so my message to people who are interested in this effort, who want to talk about taking the country back from the politicians and the bureaucrats and restoring the rule of law, we have a website. It's called madisoncoalition.org. But don't go to the website. Contact me. I'm gonna do something I don't often do. I'm gonna give you my phone number, and I want people who are interested to call me or text me. It's a very easy phone number. It's 202-255-5000. And if you would be interested in hearing more about this movement, we have a conference call every week where leaders gather from all over the country to talk about this strategy. If you're interested, call me at 202-255-5000. And I will get back to you. I promise that either I or someone else will get back to you personally, and we will talk to you about how you can get involved and make a difference. Because this effort doesn't happen because of people like us on this call. It happens because of the people like you who are listening. And when America gets fired up, things change, right? That's how the War of Independence happened. That's how slavery ended. That's how women got the right to vote. And that's what we have to do now. We need a movement to take away power from politicians and bureaucrats and restore it to the people. Trump's talked about it, but we need a movement to back it up.
You know, part of the problem goes away with another amendment. So we start with your amendment, keep 9.
Right.
But part of the problem goes away when we talk in terms of term limits, when we talk in terms of keeping the Chuck Schumers out of the fray for what, 20, 30, 40 years? These folks have built up the cabal that gives them the sense of self-right, an entitlement of their own to do the court packing you're fighting against. I think I do agree, you got to start somewhere. And I think your 9 Supreme Court justices being protected is a great place to start. We've been watching way too much. Billy, what are you going to do in Virginia with all these new issues?
Yeah, no, it's clearly incumbent on us as citizens to make our voices heard and to take it to the people who are running for office. So again, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, our current lieutenant governor, Winsome Earl Sears, is running for governor. She's running to be the first Black female governor in this nation's history. And she's a former Marine. She's a mother and grandmother and a small business owner and entrepreneur. And she supports the Keep 9 movement. Her opponent, Abigail Spanberger, who is a so-called moderate, and I say so-called moderate because her voting record shows that she votes exactly the same way that Nancy Pelosi and Joaquin Jeffries tell her to vote, except for 2 or 3 votes a year that she probably gets permission to vote against the Democrat interest. She's not a real centrist or a moderate as she claims to be. And I think were she still in Congress, she would be somebody who would be advocating for packing the courts, because all the issues she cares about require getting rid of these good Supreme Court decisions that we've seen in the past 5 or 10 years. So we've got to focus our efforts from the grassroots up. You know, I want to call on everyone to reach out to their members of Congress and their senators, and to indicate to them that they support this Keep 9 amendment. And I think with that kind of grassroots support, we should be able to see this push through. And again, I think people have this misinformed perception that the Constitution is baked because we haven't done an amendment in so long. And to your point, Gene, I think the advantage of doing an amendment like Keep 9 is that we show the people that, again, the people are in control. The people are the sovereigns in this nation, and they're the ones whose rights they lend to the government, in a limited enumerated fashion, and it's not the other way around. It's not we don't live in a Soviet style system where the government is where all the rights come from.
Right. This is the grassroots for I enjoy calling this show the Grassroots Truthcast. Billy, you perfectly typified why I do. It's the grassroots. It's from the bottom up, the average citizen that gets a chance to be protected and heard on these shows and represented. I really think, Ramon, the issue of Keep Nine, I'm sold that your approach to going forward with just one amendment is logical, and I think it puts into motion a momentum that opens the doors for the others you suggested. But I think there's more than one issue here, because bad behavior is pretty damn pervasive the last 6 to 8 years. And I think it's time that people in all three divisions of government get properly punished for wrongdoing. They're not entitled to a lifelong career. And the elected official who comes in a little wet behind the ears, getting pushed around by bureaucrats who've been in close to 40 years themselves, ends up being I know what you promised your citizens, but here's how we do it here, is what they're running up against when they come into the swamp. I think that there's a place for these bureaucrats to stand down as well. And I think the recent Supreme Court case, surprisingly, was the Chevron case, which took regulation and said, hey, you DEP, Army Corps of Engineers, you've gone too far with your regulation, and to penalize and punish is not the scope of your authority unless it was vested to you from Congress. Folks, Ramon Buhler is 14 years with working for Congress, and he comes to us with a lot of savvy experience on what it's going to take to get a constitutional amendment through. I've had a passion about wanting to do it, Ramon, but I'm willing to concede. I want one or two or three to get through. My website has 11 of them, all with different levels of concern. It's more of a billboard for you a bulletin board for you to look at, and please comment on them. Billy, I can't think of a better guest you could have brought to us today in the time we have remaining. You want to start, Billy, with a final comment for your constituents and where you'd like to see Ramon's issue go?
Yeah, I am so committed to the Keep Nine cause because for all the reasons that you outlined. It is the ultimate check on the co-equal branch of government, the judicial branch. And the thing that Ramon hasn't talked about is that the other thing, in addition to reaching out to him and connecting up at a grassroots level and reaching out to your congressman and pushing them towards this right objective, the other thing that we'd love to see is, and on the Keep Nine website, you can make donations, and we can take both political oriented donations, and we can take nonpartisan tax deductible donations. And so if you're not somebody who has a whole lot of time, and you're somebody who has a whole lot of money, we're happy to arm Ramon with the resources that he needs to get this through the process. He's been thinking about this for 14 or 15 years, and there's a lot of things that he would love to do that he is financially not able to do. And that's the other thing I want to call on your listeners. If
Okay.
even
Yeah, let me help you out there. Ramon, since you're not going to talk about asking for money, Billy and I are going to do it for you. Billy,
you can go to madisoncoalition.org and donate. madisoncoalition.org. And if you want to do a tax deductible, you call me 202-255-5000 and we'll set it up for you.
Excellent point. And you've also given your phone number. So this is unbelievable. And I think this is transformative because I'd say it was far reaching a year ago or 2 years ago. After the last 100 days, I, I don't think anything is moving fast enough to impress me anymore. I'm pretty impressed with what's happened in the last 100 days, almost 4 months. Ramon, any final thoughts, please?
I just want to say that we are at an inflection point in American history. This administration has shown that impossible things can be done in very short time. I think we are at a point where American people are fired up, where a bipartisan coalition can be assembled that can overcome the inertia in Washington. And what we need right now is grassroots energy. We need donor energy. We need the energy of politicians. And so, again, my closing message is if you want to help take this country back from the politicians and the bureaucrats, call me 202 255 5000. You have a very special group of listeners. That's why I'm giving out this phone number. Let's get involved. Let's change this country.
Very good, Ramon. In fact, let's take it a step further. We'll take that link in your homepage and get it posted on grassrootstruthcast.com, www.genevalentino.com, the home of the Grassroots Truthcast. To my two guests, Bill Mower and Ramon Buhler, both advocates in making America great. I can't thank you enough for joining me here today. This has been a sore spot with me. We need constitutional amendments in place to take the news cycle down from all the bickering and the back and forth with conclusive penalties that are formidable, that put people behind bars for behaving about what we whine about every day in the news that needs to be fixed. This is a perfect solution, starting with the Supreme Court, the court packing. This is basically the beginning of more regulation freedom. Donald Trump was on a path with it, but Ramon's talking about more of it. And really, one of the next constitutional amendments that should follow right behind this court packing is a balanced budget amendment, which we once had or were working toward. This is a mandate. There's no reason we would be in debt. I used to be county commissioner in Escambia County, Florida for 2 terms. I'd be shot if I didn't balance the budget each year. Our county budget started in the middle of the summer, and we had a conclusive budget, but before Thanksgiving, that went for the next fiscal year. That's what we lived by for the next 12 months, and we didn't spend a dime more than that budget allowed. We can do the same here in the United States. We've just got these layers of bureaucrats that are pencil pushers at the desk, tying up your ability to get to the bathroom. And that's the problem around here. So hopefully they'll clear out this Doge thing, will clear them out, whether the libs like it or not. Let's hope Doge really does an enema on that place before Elon goes back to Tesla. Well, gentlemen, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Gene, for hosting us, and always good to catch up on these good critical issues.
And we'll get this whole initiative posted on grassrootstruthcast.com. And thank you, folks, for another episode of the Grassroots Truthcast. We love bringing these episodes to you, and we could use your support. Go to grassrootstruthcast.com or genevalentino.com and kindly subscribe. Subscribe and ask your friends to subscribe. We push these episodes out to you by email weekly, the link, and you get to watch everything that we're doing instead of fishing around on the website trying to find it. We give it to you because you asked us to. Again, thank you so much for another episode of the Grassroots Truthcast. See you soon. Hi, friends. Gene Valentino from the Grassroots Truthcast. You've got to join us not only for the great shows and entertainment and guests, but you got to join us because our sponsorship is growing. And it would mean a lot to them, not to mention me, if you come on board. And the one we're featuring this week is Luis Sanchez from the Cigar Shop. He owns a company called La Tradicion Cubana. The Cigar Shop, Miami, Florida, since 1995. This Luis is really one heck of a guy. He's determined to manufacture cigars based on an unprecedented excellence in quality using old-fashioned Cuban methods. The cigar isn't always cheaper, but it is better. And if, like you're drinking a fine wine, you got to have a fine cigar, look for Luis Sanchez at the cigar shop. He helped me find a nice Connecticut wrapper with a Nicaraguan blend. And this cigar has become not only my enjoyment, but this cigar has also become my brand and my marketing tool. If you notice up close, we've got a little label he's put on there for me. And that's my website, genevalentino.com. It's at the Grassroots Truthcast. Now, here's the deal. You go to thecubanshop.com, find the cigar you want, and Luis will throw in the labels for free. But you got to tell him Gene sent you. Tell Luis Gene sent you. The labels are free. These are $50 to $100 values based on the count, and you can get this to become part of your branding experiment. I'm using this with my guests on the Grassroots Truthcasts. This could be your brand on your product, your service, anywhere in the world. Look for Luis Sanchez at thecubanshop.com. Thanks for joining us. Enjoy your smoke.
Thanks for joining us for Gene Valentino's Grassroots Truthcast. Be sure to like and subscribe, and God bless America.